도시는 세계와 연결되어 문화를 창조했고 새로운 것을 받아들였다.
함께여서 우리는 더 자유롭고 더 멀리 갈 수 있어.
닫힌 문이 아니라 열린 질문으로.
나에게 APEC은
자유,
융합,
국제성,
다양성,
포용,
개발.
신라의 정신이 APEC 2025로 이어집니다.
Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. President Lee Jae-myung will hold a press conference today, marking his first 100 days in office. Attention is now on what message he will deliver regarding the local economy and bilateral relations with the U.S. More than 300 South Korean workers detained in last week's massive immigration raid in Georgia will be leaving the United States on a charter flight Thursday at noon local time. Conservative activist and a close ally of U.S. President Donald Trump, Charlie Kirk, was fatally shot at a college event in Utah. Local authorities say he was killed with a single shot in what's believed to have been a targeted attack. Today marks South Korean President Lee Jae-myung's 100th day in office. He's scheduled to hold a press conference starting at 10 a.m. today. Under the slogan 100 Days for Recovery, Growth for the Future, the briefing will last about 90 minutes with more than 150 reporters in attendance. He's expected to address a wide range of topics, including his vision on diplomacy and improving people's livelihoods. Eyes are now on what message he will share regarding peace on the Korean Peninsula, as well as tariff negotiations and bilateral relations with the United States. Pending issues also include follow-up measures to reform aimed at reducing prosecutors' powers. This is the second time that President Lee is holding a presser since taking office in early June. So it's been 100 days since President Lee Jae-myung took office following a snap election in June. For more on this, we're joined today by Professor Hans Chattel, Professor of Political Science at Yonsei University. Professor Chattel, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me, Angie. Good morning to you.
Morning. So we will be hearing from the president soon in his press conference, and it's been quite a busy first 100 days, from his summit with President Trump to taking down loudspeakers near the border and handing out consumer vouchers. What would you say are the biggest takeaways so far?
Well, certainly what I think people will remember most about these 100 days looking back will be the crisis, first of all, of this past week. Of course, that was unexpected, I think, but it certainly will be the dominant challenge that President Lee Jae-myung has had to deal with, trying to figure out a way to agreeably bring home these hundreds of South Korean nationals that were detained in Georgia, and also tried to work out an agreement with the U.S. to figure out how to go forward with Korea's pledges to continue to invest in the U.S. economy at this difficult time. I think the second biggest challenge that the president had, which is very much related to this, was working out the trade agreement with the United States over the summer. I mean, keep in mind that the U.S. and South Korea had a free trade agreement going back over a decade before the second Trump presidency began, and the timing that President Lee had to deal with was the U.S. side basically pulling back on that free trade agreement and having to renegotiate. So like many other U.S. allies around the world, President Lee Jae-myung has been put in the position of having to spend a lot of his time right now, for him, his first 100 days, basically trying to first come up with a series of trade measures that would try to curtail the damage of essentially losing many of the benefits that went with that free trade agreement. And so, of course, South Korean exports many of them now have this 15% tariff. And, there could have been a lot more in terms of tariffs imposed on South Korea. So in a sense, it was about containing damage from that. And more recently, it's been about trying to contain the damage from this immigration raid this past week. So not an easy run for the first 100 days, I think.
Absolutely, a lot of issues to tackle. And the first 100 days usually give us a pretty good idea of where the new government is headed. How do you think this administration stands apart from previous governments? And what is your overall assessment of his performance so far?
Sure, Angie. Well, turning to more mundane matters in domestic politics, I think President Lee made very key statements when he first took office that this would be the government of democracy promotion following what happened with the previous Yoon administration, the way that hit the rocks with the martial law decree and so forth. It's too early to tell, I suppose, long term, how democracy promotion will carry out in this administration, whether we'll see some kinds of innovations over the next few years that would bring the public closer to democratic decision making. I think a lot of these issues are emerging, but they've been somewhat on the back burner, I think, since foreign policy has been such a driving issue so far in this presidency. Another key issue, of course, was just simply improving the well-being, the welfare, and the opportunities for everyday working people and small businesses. And I think the vouchers, which you mentioned earlier, in which small businesses could essentially be magnets of consumer traffic over this summer, I think that helped. And I think symbolically that sent a message that this government was not just out for the big corporations, but for the mom and pop shops that often find it hard hold their own in the economic conditions that we're in. And then with diplomacy, I think before President Lee was elected, there were a lot of questions as to whether he would tilt the country closer to China, perhaps even toward diplomacy with North Korea, and whether that would possibly create some distance or even tension with regard to the U.S. and even Japan. But on the contrary, over the past few months, first of all, President Lee has shown that diplomacy with Japan is still a top priority, and I think he's trying to put the country also. The question is whether he can maintain that diplomacy with Japan while also trying to basically get some measures from Japan that would suggest a more complete and multi-sided reconciliation process rather than South Korea simply making concessions to Japan. I think he's taken that direction. Very interesting that he had the summit with the Japanese prime minister at the time before going to Washington. So pragmatism has been very much an order of the day for this president.
Right, and looking ahead, what might be some of the main things he will need to focus on for the remainder of his term?
Well, there are some big issues that any president, I think, right now in this country in the 2020s really needs to focus on. And they're the big issues that the public worries about, but yet it seems no president over the past several years is able to resolve it, making housing more affordable, figuring out how to reform education in a way that more young people will be able to avoid burnout and find paths that will encourage them to prosper and stay here, and find career paths at a time when jobs for young adults are diminishing. And also related to this, at a time when now the country is investing a lot of money in the U.S. and a lot of other economies abroad. Of course, that's always money that could otherwise be spent creating jobs domestically. So trying to figure out how to create more jobs for the country's young adults at a time when overseas investment is increasing. This is something that I've heard a lot of everyday people talking about when I've had conversations here in Seoul. I think my students often worry about it as well, yet it's not necessarily an issue that's at the front burner. So simply improving people's opportunities and quality of life and giving them more voice in the political process. All the younger generation's key concerns that are important issues that often presidents have to put back on the back burner. Can this president put it on the front burner?
Right, absolutely. All right, Professor Charlie, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Angie. Take care.
Seoul and Washington have finalized arrangements for the immediate repatriation of South Korean workers detained by the United States. A charter flight is set to take off on Thursday, ensuring their safe return and maintaining future re-entry rights. Our Muniran has the details.
A charter plane is scheduled to fly around 316 South Koreans from the U.S. back home after they were arrested and detained by immigration authorities in Georgia. The repatriation flight is scheduled to depart on Thursday at noon local time, with the detainees expected to leave a detention facility and travel to the airport between 2 and 4 a.m. In addition to the 316 South Koreans, 14 other nationals are also set to board the flight, while one Korean reportedly chose to remain in the U.S. The workers were detained last week during a raid at the construction site of a Hyundai Motor Group and LG Energy Solution joint battery plant. Although the flight was originally planned for Wednesday, Seoul's foreign ministry said the repatriation was delayed following U.S. President Donald Trump's recommendation, as he wanted to hear Korea's position on whether the detainees should return home or stay in the U.S. to continue helping to train American workers. Debates over whether detainees should be handcuffed while being escorted to the airport were reportedly resolved when Trump ordered that they be transferred without physical restraints. This was confirmed during a meeting between South Korea's Foreign Minister Cho Hyun and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio at the White House on Wednesday. Following the talks, Cho told reporters that Washington agreed to his requests that the detainees would be repatriated without restraints and their future re-entry into the U.S. would not be affected. He added that given the detainees' shock and exhaustion, it would be better for them to return home first and later come back to the U.S. to work if necessary, a plan that the U.S. side, including Secretary Rubio, respected. He also confirmed that a working group between the U.S. State Department and South Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs will be established to discuss the creation of a new visa category for skilled Korean workers. Cho attributed the smooth resolution to the trust built between Trump and President Lee Jae-myung during the recent Korea-U.S. summit, and said that the foreign ministry will continue close consultations with the U.S. to ensure the safe and orderly return of its citizens. 문혜련, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the Mexican government has announced new import tariffs on countries without free trade agreements, saying the move is aimed at protecting domestic industries. According to the announcement released on Wednesday, the plan targets 1,463 products across 17 strategic sectors, including automobiles, steel, plastics, home appliances, and textiles. The current duty of up to 35% will be raised to as high as 50% within the limits set by World Trade Organization rules. South Korean goods are expected to be affected as Mexico is Seoul's largest trading partner in Latin America. The latest measures are estimated to impact about 8.6% of Mexico's total imports, worth around $52 billion. An American conservative activist and an influential ally of President Donald Trump was shot and killed during a campus event in Utah. The incident has reignited concerns over rising political violence in the United States. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
Conservative activist Charlie Kirk, a close ally of U.S. President Donald Trump, was shot and killed on Wednesday during a campus event in Utah. FBI Director Kash Patel took to social media in the hours after the shooting to say a suspect was in custody following the release of another suspect who officials say was not the accurate person of interest. Trump confirmed Kirk's death on his Truth Social platform, calling him great and even legendary. The shooting took place at Utah Valley University, where Kirk was speaking under a white tent as part of a debate hosted by his nonprofit. Videos posted to social media show him addressing questions about gun violence when a single gunshot rang out. The 31-year-old clutched his neck as blood poured from the wound, sending shocked audience members screaming and running for cover.
And then as the guy said shooting or shooters or something like that, you just hear the gunshot and I'm sorry, you just see his neck just open up and there's just so much blood that just came out. It was horrible.
One person was briefly taken into custody, but later determined not to be involved with officials, saying the person was not the accurate person of interest. Kirk had been a prominent supporter of President Trump and frequently toured at college campuses, engaging in political debates with students. Wednesday's event was the first stop in a 14-city America comeback tour. He was the co-founder and CEO of Turning Point USA, a conservative youth organization he launched in 2012, aged 18. Kirk's death marked a shocking end to a career built on mobilizing youth for conservative politics and adds to growing concerns about the escalating threat of politically motivated violence nationwide. 이승재, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. In the Middle East, at least 35 people were killed in a major Israeli air offensive against Yemen on Wednesday. The Israel Air Force conducted strikes on Houthi-controlled areas in the Yemeni capital Sana'a and Al-Jawf governorate, targeting military outposts, fuel depots, command centers, and a media headquarters. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said these strikes were in direct response to recent Houthi drone and missile attacks on Israeli territory. Houthi-run health authorities reported that civilians were among those killed and 131 people were injured during the operation. The Israeli Defense Forces confirmed the destruction of sites used for military operations, including Houthi propaganda and communications infrastructure. Residents in Sana'a described widespread damage, including the shelling of residential neighborhoods and government facilities in Al-Jawf. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called for sanctions and a partial trade suspension against Israel. Cuba is gradually recovering from a nationwide blackout following a fifth grid outage in less than a year, which left some 10 million people without power. Cuba's national power grid completely collapsed in the early morning hours of Wednesday, likely triggered by a shutdown at the country's largest electricity producer, Antonio Guterres' thermal power plant. By the evening of the same day, officials confirmed that electricity was slowly returning, particularly to essential infrastructure such as hospitals, airports, and water systems. In Havana, 3 substations were reactivated, restoring power to parts of the capital. Power outages have been a chronic problem in the country for years, characterized by aging infrastructure, persistent fuel shortages, and a fragile power grid. U.S. sanctions limiting fuel imports have exacerbated the situation. Officials say it may take days to reach pre-outage levels. American tech giant Oracle's shares surged by approximately 43% on Wednesday, reaching the highest intraday high since 1992. This surge in the company's value was driven by growing demand for AI cloud services and several multi-billion-dollar contracts, including a landmark $300 billion deal with OpenAI announced on Tuesday. As a result of this surge, Oracle's chairman, Larry Ellison, saw his net worth increase by approximately $100 billion in just one day, bringing it to roughly $393 billion. This briefly made Ellison the world's wealthiest person, surpassing Elon Musk. By the end of the day, Oracle's stock was approximately 36% higher than its previous closing price. Finally, NASA announced on Wednesday that its Perseverance rover had found significant potential evidence of ancient microbial life on Mars. This discovery comes from a sample taken from a rock that formed billions of years ago. The samples revealed mudstones that are rich in organic carbon, iron, phosphorus, and sulfur minerals, which are commonly associated with microbial processes on Earth. Perseverance collected this particular sample, known as the Sapphire Canyon Rock, in July 2024 along the Naratva Valleys, an area that was once a flowing riverbed. While scientists believe that the rock's leopard-spotted patterns and the presence of carbon-based materials suggest biological origins, non-biological processes cannot yet be completely ruled out.
It's another refreshing cool start to the day in most parts. But as you can see, roller coaster temperatures are expected for the next few days. And as many are coming down with a cold nowadays, it's best to wear a face mask in a crowded area and on public transportation. After the heat will rise fast, and western regions will have warmer daytime highs than the east. At a high of 32 degrees Celsius here in the capital, Gwangju at 31 degrees, Daegu at 30 degrees Celsius under mostly sunny skies nationwide with strong UV rays. However, looking ahead from tomorrow night into Saturday afternoon, expect bursts of heavy rain with thunder, lightning, and gusty winds. The capital area in Gangwon-do province could see up to 100 millimeters of downpours. Southern regions might be seeing up to 80 millimeters. So please be sure to stay weather aware and take precautions.
That's all we have for this edition of New Day at Arirang. Thanks for watching. We'll be back shortly with our special live coverage of President Lee Jae-myung's press briefing, marking his first 100 days in office. That starts at 10 a.m. Korea time. Stay tuned.